This video is made possible by Practical Defense Systems, the best online security training at the lowest prices. You can start your security career today online at pdsclasses.com. Check them out. Hi, I'm Joel Persinger. I'm the Gun Guy. Thank you very much for all of your support of GunGuyTV. I'm very, very grateful. A reminder, please check me out on X and Rumble because they do not censor or shadow ban my videos. Those are things that YouTube most definitely does. We're in an election year. You're going to see more of that rather than less. So X and Rumble would be a good place to go if you would like to see the things I produce. Very recently, Face the Nation interviewed the director of ATF. The interview did not go well, in my opinion, and it was widely panned for lots of reasons. Still, there's a lot of stuff people took as being accurate in that interview, which is glaringly false. I know that, and I don't know if you do. So I decided to invite my friend Dan O'Kelly, who retired from ATF after 20 some odd years as a special agent and a trainer in their academy, and who now runs a company that travels around the country teaching law enforcement officers and civilians about federal firearms law. You can check out his website if you'd like at gunlearn.com, and there will be a link in the description. I talked to him at length a couple of days ago, and I thought you might want to hear what he had to say in debunking the Face the Nation interview. Here it is. Dan, my friend, thank you very much for joining me. It's a joy seeing you. We haven't talked in quite some time, and I'm eager to hear what your views are on a number of things. I suppose we could probably start with, is it Stephen Debunk? What is that guy's name, the ATF dude? I can never pronounce his name.
I believe it's Dettelbach.
Dittelbach. There you go.
Dettelbach.
Okay, well, anyway. So I would look, do you know that, first of all, before we comment about the interview that he did with Face the Nation, which was deceptive and disingenuous and, in my opinion, intentionally meant to mislead. So I've got you here to clarify a bunch of stuff there. Do you know the background of that guy? Because I don't. It strikes me that he doesn't really know firearms. Just from watching that interview and seeing some of the other things he's talked about, he doesn't come across as a guy. He comes across more like a political appointee and not a guy that really knows anything about guns. Am I reading him wrong?
No, that's my take. He's a mouthpiece for the Biden administration to run ATF and to toe the company line, as it were. You know, ATF has a position on several topics, and they've been given their marching orders. You know, guns are bad. And then the first thing they talked about, he brought up bump stocks. And I was surprised when he made the comment that, you know, he pointed out an M16, or what he said was an M16, and then an AR-15 with a bump stock on it. I'm sorry, it was AK-47s, a full auto AK and then an AK with a bump stock. And he said they operate exactly the same way. No, they don't. Something with a bump stock is semi-automatic, and it fires one shot per function of the trigger, regardless of the fact that that's one of their positions that, hey, we don't like it, so we're going to pretend it falls within a statutory definition to the contrary. You know, then he went on to short-barreled rifles. If you look at that video again, no one else seems to have pointed this out in the YouTube videos I've looked at and in the articles, but they show two clearly AR-15 pistols with forearm braces on them. Both of them have forearm braces on them. And he points to the one closest to him and he goes, now everybody agrees this is a short-barreled rifle. He says, but this one comes in, it's illegal because it comes in two pieces. What? Regardless, I don't even know if that's a word, but regardless of the fact that this also had a brace on it, this idea he put forward that because it comes in two pieces, what? That has nothing to do with the definition. The two elements in the definition of a rifle are designed to be fired from the shoulder and having a rifled bore. You know, then the issue is, does it have the two required lengths, barrel and overall length? But he's showing two braced pistols, saying one is an SBR and one is a braced pistol. Then they went on to the AR-15.
Well, and to clarify, if you don't mind my clarification, an AR pistol is not designed to be fired from the shoulder.
Correct.
It's a
Which is
pistol.
what makes it a pistol.
That's what makes it a
Right.
pistol. Right.
And a pistol, any pistol becomes a rifle if you install a shoulder stock or any device designed, pause for effect, to be fired from the shoulder. The fact that maybe millions of people, for all I know, fire braces from the shoulder, the item still wasn't designed by the person who made it for that use. So it's not a stock. At any rate, then he went on and he shows, well, let's look at AR-15s. He shows the first one saying it's an M16, a machine gun. And he says, look right on it, the government warning, restricted to law enforcement and government use only. And I'm shaking my head. I'm going, wait a minute. I don't know who you worked for back from 1994 to 2004, but that was the marking required to be put on all what the government called assault weapons during what was called the crime bill, which sunsetted in 2004 and was not renewed by Bush Sr. But for that 10-year period, any semi-automatic that had a detachable magazine and another feature that was on this evil list had to bear that warning. That's all that is. That has nothing to do with a machine gun. Uh, anyway, from then, he went on to the 3D printed drop-in auto sear. And it, acted as though this thing just appeared recently and that the 3D printers are the problem. Drop-in auto sears have been around for nearly 50 years. ATF ruled in 1981 that a drop-in auto sear, as well as lightning links and a lot of other things, are machine guns by themselves under definition 3 of a machine gun. They're nothing new. Like I say, almost 50 years ago. So I could go on, but I'm droning.
Oh no, you're. No, I think it's no. I do want you to go on, and the reason I want you to go on is this. And this is just my opinion. Take it for what you will. If you're watching this, I'm of the opinion that this interview was intended by Face the Nation and by Mr. Diddlebach to mislead. It was intended to inform the public, or I should say misinform the public about what the law is and what these guns actually do. I would challenge him if I were standing in the room and ask him, all right, director, which one of these types of guns has been used in a crime lately?
Exactly.
And he wouldn't be able to tell me because the answer is hardly any, and if so, very, very rarely. They even had some full auto guns there, and I'm going, okay, when's the last time somebody walked in there with a squad automatic weapon or a crew served weapon and robbed a bank? So what was the point of all this? So I would say go ahead, please, because I want to use this show to inform the public as to the truth of this rather than let the lie hang out there.
Well, I would love to have been standing there at the table and at the end them ask me, if I had any questions or something. I would love to have asked. And yet during this whole interview, not one of these has jumped up and shot any of us. All these guns have just laid there the whole time. They don't seem, this group of evil things don't have to have any evil intent, I guess. The next thing they touched on was tracing/ghost guns. And that's one of my biggest pet peeves about ATF's treatment of some of these Second Amendment issues is, have you ever heard any ATF person complain about a pre-1968 gun that doesn't have a serial number? I never have. Prior to the Gun Control Act taking effect in 1968, no shotgun had to have a serial number. No 22 rimfire caliber rifle had to have a serial number. And they're still out there in circulation every place. You can find them in every gun shop that has used guns on the shelves. Well, those can't be traced without an individual serial number. But you have never heard ATF say anything negative about those being ghost guns, because it's not really tracing that's the issue. Let's clear something up about tracing. All tracing does is tell law enforcement who was the original retail purchaser of the gun and what dealership sold it. So if you trace a gun of mine, hey, this gun was bought originally by Dan O'Kelly from Joe's Gun Shop at 3rd and Main Street. But if and when I sell that gun to somebody else, and that person or someone that they sell it to, it could be third, fourth, fifth hand down the road. They commit a crime with it. ATF recovers it and traces it. It comes back to me. Hey, I sold that gun 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 weeks ago. I don't know who owns it now. It doesn't tell you who pulled the trigger. It tells you who was the guy who originally bought it up to years ago. And that's one of the things that Ms. Brennan, Margaret Brennan from Face the Nation, said in that interview. She said, oh, well, this homemade AR-15 doesn't have a serial number, so you can't trace it and tell who pulled the trigger. And ATF glanced right over that as though that was a thing. Tracing doesn't tell you who pulled a trigger on a gun.
You were there for 23 years. And in that 23 years, how many cases are you aware of in which the ability to trace the gun used in the crime helped solve the crime?
I'm not going to pretend I can remember every trace I ever did or that someone else did that I was asked to get involved with, but I don't remember any where that put the case together. And here's the reasoning. You catch someone who just shot someone. Well, either they drop the gun and run, and even if it has a serial number and you trace it again, unless they were the original purchaser, it's not bringing you back to them. It's bringing you back to whoever in the world bought that gun originally. If you catch them in possession of the gun, do you really need to see if they're the original purchaser? Hey, you have it in your hand. You have it in your waistband. You have it on the seat next to you in your car. I don't need a trace for that. If you are already guilty of possession by a felon or being armed while dealing drugs, I don't need the trace. I don't care if you never bought that thing. You know, if you got it out of a ditch or stole it, you are still a felon in possession of that gun. You are still guilty of, armed drug dealing or what have you. Tracing is not necessarily, the reason that ATF promotes it as the end all to gun crime is a fantasy. The real reason they have a problem with ghost guns is, number one, you can still prosecute ghost gun possession if it's found in the possession of a felon, a drug dealer, what have you. You can still prosecute that gun in state court. But in federal court, you have to prove one extra element, and that element is called interstate nexus. You have to prove that that gun crossed a state line at some point and affected interstate commerce. The reason is because ATF's authority over firearms is Congress gave ATF the authority to regulate firearms which affect interstate commerce. Congress never gave ATF the authority to regulate all firearms. That's why, unless your state has a state level law against it, people can make their own guns. If you are legal to purchase a gun from a dealer, then you are legal to make your own homemade gun at home. Again, notwithstanding some state law to the contrary. So if you're legal to buy a gun, you're legal to make a gun. And when you make a gun, you're not required to put a serial number on it or your company name, etc. That is only incumbent on a licensed manufacturer as per Title 18 of the U.S. Code. So ATF, because they cannot establish who made a homemade gun, they can't establish where it was made. And therefore, you cannot prove interstate nexus. Therefore, you can't prosecute a ghost gun in federal court for most federal crimes. And ATF cannot justify their position to Congress every year, justify their budget by prosecuting guns in state courts. So where they try to convince you ghost guns are evil because kids are getting them, felons are getting them. Well, kids are getting factory-made guns. Felons are getting factory-made guns. Ghost guns aren't the only guns they get. The real issue is you can't prosecute ghost guns in federal court, and they don't have jurisdiction over them for the most part.
And you mentioned something, I think, which is important. Is this because they actively want to prosecute them in federal court because they feel that they'll get a better conviction or a longer sentence? Or is this because they want to prosecute them in federal court so they can justify their budget before Congress and get more money?
Both are true. You will get more time in federal court than you will in state court. Every seminar that we teach, one of the questions we ask the audience, which is usually composed mostly of police officers, hey, what kind of sentences are you getting when you prosecute a felon in possession of a gun in state court? And you get a bunch of shoulder shrugs. You know, probation, you don't get any prosecution. Whereas in federal court, you're going to get considerably more than that. Also, when the person has a considerable criminal record. But both, they're also early in my career with ATF, one of the first things I remember somebody saying to me, this clever anecdote, was that the purpose of a bureaucracy is to increase its size and justify its position, its existence. So yeah, ATF, like every other federal agency, just like DEA, they have to show that we're seizing dope every year and we're catching drug dealers. So keep giving us a new budget every year. Well, ATF has to do the same thing with firearms. So they want to prosecute in federal court, not state court.
Arguably, Mr. Dittelbach is a mouthpiece for the Biden administration. I agree. When he goes on and does this interview, and you got an ATF agent standing there with him, the agent at least has got to know that he's blowing smoke up everybody's dress and that a lot of the stuff he's saying is nonsense. Is this by design? Is this meant to mislead, as I suspect, do you think?
I believe it is. It was obvious to me when I watched the video that agent, and I don't know him, I'm not even sure I know his name. I think it was Chris something, but it was obvious that he was posturing his answers that were posed, of the questions that were posed to him by the director, because a lot of the questions the director was posing to him were leading questions, wanting the agent to validate some of the assertions he was making, which weren't true in a lot of cases. And the agent was hedging his answers because he didn't want to make a fool of himself.
What other things do you think in that interview were completely erroneous that we should clear up?
I thought it was funny that mentioning the cartels, ATF has always brought up this thing about, these are the guns that the Mexican cartels want, or for that matter, Colombian cartels, whatever. But you're talking about criminal organizations in a foreign country. Personally, I don't see that as our problem. Our problem in the U.S. is what's flowing across the border into the U.S. Mexico's drugs, Colombia's drugs, the illegal aliens. I think that if Mexico would get rid of their cartels, fight their own crime problem, then there wouldn't be a cartel that wanted our guns. It seems to me like the easiest way to get rid of the problem with guns flowing south is, where can you not get a gun onto an airplane, right? Consider the security you have to go through to get on an airplane. Make our border like the security line at the airport. Each person goes through a magnetometer, puts all their possessions on an X-ray belt. That would stop the flow of guns into Mexico. But by the same token, that would stop the flow of illegal aliens coming across, which the Democratic Party sees as future voters. So that's never going to happen.
So I would just say to, the average person, which I am, if you're watching these things and you see these kind of interviews, particularly on the mainstream media, which has an anti-gun, rights tilt anyway, take it with a huge grain of salt and then do a little research to make sure that you're not being fed a bunch of baloney. Because in this particular interview, it sounds like you agree with me, Dan. This guy was shoveling a lot of bull hockey, bull
Right?
bucky, whatever you want to call it, BS. He was baffling everybody with BS. Anything else we should talk about that we haven't that's going on with ATF or going on in any of these weird cases?
Um, I think it's interesting and very fortunate for the Second Amendment community that the Bruen decision, what it's commonly referred to, New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruen, this is a case where Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas gave his opinion that, well, it's a long opinion, but because of the Bruen decision, I think you'll agree, and we will continue to see the furtherance of a lot of our Second Amendment rights. Many things have been shot down recently, and everything that does get shot down, ATF takes it the next court higher. That's their prerogative. Take it to the Court of Appeals, get another opinion until it eventually gets to the Supreme Court. That's what we're waiting for on a lot of issues like forearm braces, receivers, etc. Once it gets there, we're going to win. I think the lifespan of these anti-gun measures have a shelf life that is about to come to an end, and
I think it's relatively
to see
short. I would say I've had a couple of attorneys estimate 3 to 5 years. Most of this stuff is going to be settled, and it's going to be very, very difficult for them to defend laws that in any way infringe upon our rights. And I'm looking forward to that time because guess what? It's within my lifetime, I hope, and yours too. And so that will be very, very cool. Well, Dan, you got the last word, brother. Anything else we should say?
No, I think that's it. You can always go on other topics, but that I think puts an end on the ones we've talked about.
Thank you again for watching the entire interview. I hope it was informative, and thank you again for all of your support of Gun Guy TV. If you'd like to actually support the channel and help me keep the lights on, you can do that by joining Gun Guy TV Crew, and you'll find that at GunGuyTVCrew.org. Or if you like, you can check out the link in the description. You can also go to Patreon or Locals and sign up there. It helps me a ton. Have a great week. Thank you very much for all of your support, and wherever you go, whatever you do, stay safe.